Hi, welcome to the Get Strong and Healthy podcast. My name is Anna Clow. Thank you for being here. Today, we have a special guest joining us, Brian Wright. Brian has been in the personal training industry for 25 years. His education and experience have helped him focus primarily on helping individuals with improving their quality of life, which is now coined as longevity. He helps individuals drastically improve their health with simple additions like minimalist strength training, hot and cold exposure, and protein tracking. So I'm really excited to get into our conversation today. I met Brian the other week, and he is such an amazing individual. So let's dive right on in. So, Brian, if you want to share anything more about yourself, and also I want to hear about your story, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I think this is great. So hopefully we can have a good conversation about, kind of, I guess, whatever pops into our head and maybe help some people. But my story, without rambling too much, is like many people in the fitness industry. I came to this from athletics. So I grew up as a soccer player, played soccer in college, and really was in college that it kind of became more clear that I really liked training days as opposed to just game days. So in research, I kind of was like, I really like the gym. I really like the training days. I really like the aspects of the work. And so I got my first personal training certification in college and started kind of going down that road. Later, decided to pursue my master's in exercise science and was thinking I was going to be a college strength conditioning coach, but started a personal training company to help pay for grad school and, do things in the in-between hours. And that really took off. And so after grad school, it just became apparent that really what I was going to do was just run a personal training business.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about your exciting stuff going on right now with your partnership. I'll let you share.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
will be a good segue to what we're talking about.
It will, sure. So, like I said, been in personal training for many years, and had studios and built a staff, and we helped lots and lots of people. I sold that business in 2016, and then just became a private practitioner, moving more and more into helping people as I get older. Helping with busy professionals worry about getting older. And I say worry about getting older is meaning getting older better. Through that, started doing research on just how to help people, what are the biggest impacts. Recently, we just had a exciting partnership with Method Health Clubs in Ashburn, who is going to work with us to build our longevity lab. And we purposefully named it a lab, as in an exercise science lab, because we're collecting data and pushing the envelope and trying new things. And essentially it all circles around, we want the good kind of stress, eustress, to create a stress adaptation in individuals that people are able to get better from. So it's the principle of progressive overload, but it's in the genres of temperature exposure, cognitive challenge. Certainly there's a strength and VO2 aspect, but it's all around meditation and breath work and just everything that's going to kind of gel things together so that we can become better humans.
So freaking awesome. I can't wait to join with that. But I want to come back to the cold and heat exposure. But first, I want to hear a little bit more about how you take a minimalist approach with clients, because especially where we're at in Loudoun County, people are very busy. They've got very demanding jobs. And I think it's more important than ever that we take that minimalist approach and not, think that as fitness professionals who, we're obsessed with the gym, that our clients you need to have that sort of mentality to be successful, because it's simply not true.
I over the last really decade, building businesses and being involved just like everybody else with work and family, it becomes very apparent that fitness, even though I enjoy it, fitness meaning going to the gym or doing other activities like runs or anything outside of it, anything that kind of in that world of fitness, it becomes less and less doable just based on time. It's not like I can sign up for it's not like I oftentimes feel like I could sign up for an event and then train appropriately for that, especially a time intensive event like a triathlon. We'll just use that as an example. How can we maximize, we meaning busy professionals, maximize our time and get the most out of our training? So it's been the last kind of decade of my research on trying to find out what are the ways to do that. There's a lot of people in the powerlifting world that train ultra minimally and ultimately are some of the strongest people in the world, and they only train once or twice a week. Well, what if we borrowed a page from that playbook and applied it to regular people? What if we understand that we also are going to have to really train VO2 improvement, but how we do that is really just a cumulative 5, 6, 7 minutes a week, because the training VO2 costs your body so much. So we can't train it too much. It's also argued that if you're training it too much, you're really not at those high intensity levels anyway. And then steady state cardio, maybe there's some ways that we can, sort of minimize that and space it out more through daily activity. So those are things like the step counts and things like that. If we can just stay active, how do we stay active, but make sure we're actually getting into kind of a zone 2? A lot of times our activity might just be too low to be really, count as a cardiovascular benefit. It's just a better than sitting benefit. So all of those sort of life strategies of saying, what's the bare minimum we can do when we do our strength training? What's the bare minimum we can do when we do our high-end cardiovascular training, VO2 improvement? And what are some strategies in life that we can do to help move a little bit that steady state conditioning?
Awesome. Where do you think people like go wrong or sort of like have a belief in terms of their training that doesn't quite serve them, that maybe people think, oh, 5 to 7 minutes a week, what?
Yeah, we as Americans are a more is better community. We constantly think, well, if what I'm doing is not getting me the results, then I must not be doing it enough. And what I've oftentimes found is that it's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it. And a little bit of what you're doing. Obviously, if you're going to the gym and you're trying to get stronger, improve total body functional strength, which is a big predictor of longevity. Maybe you're trying to change your metabolic systems, meaning going to try to lose a little bit of body fat, but you're going into the gym and you're doing a bunch of body weight squats and 15-pound dumbbell curls. It's the what you're doing is maybe a major issue. So the programming, but the how you're doing it oftentimes becomes really important. Finding out people's real intensity levels, I think, is important. It's not training to failure, but it's also not under training. So you really just have to kind of find that good strength bracket.
Yeah.
So
it blew my mind when I started training people that once a week of a strength training session will yield some amazing results. I never would have thought. I was like, oh, yeah, everyone needs to train at least 3 days a week. And I think a lot of people like naturally sort of think that, but the power of literally a really solid session, even just once a week, 30, 45 minutes, it's insane.
For years, personally, I train one really intense, and I say intense, but that's not really the better word to say. It's focused. I really train one focused training session a week of big, giant load sessions or load movements. And then through the week, I might get 10 or 15 minutes twice a week where I do some other things. I tend to use kettlebells quite a lot, just the tool that I use, because I think they lend themselves to a very quick minimalist approach, but it doesn't mean that's the only tool that you need to use. But to your point, one big session a week and then small little 15 or 20 minutes here and there, but adding all of that up, that's like 2 hours a week.
Yeah.
So it's just spaced out.
It's totally doable. And, not just like the time aspect is huge, but also thinking about people's like internal health, like their hormones, a lot of us are under a good bit of stress.
Yeah,
And when you mix being stressed with a ton of stressful training, that's sort of a recipe for,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
some
It's not
issues.
so much, I mean, so a mentor of mine says it's not what you can train, it's what you can recover. So if you, to your point, if you take an individual that has a high stress job and they've got a demanding family schedule and all those sorts of things, and then they say, oh, I really want to also improve my health, so I'm going to begin a personal training program or whatever, without the consideration of what they can actually recover from, it might even be doing them worse to say, hey, let's start to put you under load. If they're sleeping 4 hours a night, 4 or 5 hours a night, and again, they've got this high stress job and demanding family schedule, they eat sporadically. I mean, all of those things matter.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm sure, you're as passionate about this as I am, is like helping people with the things outside of just, our training, because recovery is everything.
Yeah, yeah, it's really more about recovery, which obviously sort of birthed a lot of the aspect of the longevity lab, is that we want to try to approach, again, in a minimalist method to help people in their recovery aspects. So hot and cold contrast therapy does more than just, big vasodilation, big vasoconstriction. There's obviously some circulation benefits. Everybody talks about the lowered systemic cortisol stuff that happens when you're in cold water immersion, and that's great, and it happens. But the after effect and the consistency of that exposure is really where the real magic is. And it's a few minutes a week. I mean, like I said, if people can do 1 session, 2 sessions a week over time, that drastically changes the way their body deals with stress hormones.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's a more scientific way to explain this, but personally, and just anecdotally seeing this in clients and even like my family and friends, like those who train, work out, do hard things like cold exposure, they just approach life like with, less stress. Like every, little challenge that comes up in their life isn't this big emergency, because, they are doing these hard things and everything else seems to be easier. Have you noticed that as well?
Absolutely. It's one of the things that we talk about all the time. It's, we constantly talk about with the exposure, especially the cold, it's all breath work. And if you have practice, because everything in your body is a skill, everything is a developable skill, including strength training. Strength training is just a neurological skill. We've got to teach our bodies how to send messages to tighten up muscles and the surrounding muscles in order to complete a given task. Breath work is essentially a practice, and it's a practice while we're under, physical stress. We can help move our nervous system from, a sympathetic nervous system state to a parasympathetic nervous state, which just means that we're in more control. We're a little bit calmer. So to your point, when things in life might come at us, we get an email that says you owe $15,000 to the government. Maybe we're able to take a moment and breathe and potentially maybe deal with that problem.
Yeah, for sure. And so talk to us a little bit more about like what longevity really looks like, so people can sort of get like a clear idea of maybe how what they're doing now, like these different things we're talking about, is going to affect them in the long run.
Yeah. So first things first, it's never too late. We can always make changes and impactful changes. So I'll say that there was a study that we referenced that talks about a trained 65-year-old is significantly stronger and healthier metabolically than an untrained 20-year-old. All right. So even though there's 45 years difference there, did I do that math right? Yeah. Training and untrained is the real differentiator. When we talk about, though, why it's important, it is easier to establish patterns and keep them for a long time when we are just forming, those patterns. So it always builds up. Strength is sort of that number one example. The the notion of old man strength is a real thing, and it's because you build skill by skill by skill. Little by little by little, your nervous system picks those cues up and just understands how to do those things. We have a grip test at our longevity lab, and the guy that is 59 years old is the strongest guy in the gym, in the lab. And it's not because he exercises the most, or it literally just comes down to the fact that he has been around strength for his entire life, and he's able to recall those nervous patterns and be able to still engage when he needs to.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've always heard that old man strength, and it's cool to hear that there's real science behind it, and it makes
Absolutely.
total sense. And so one of my favorite things to hear when a client comes to me is a reason for their why behind wanting to achieve their goals is when they mention the piece of, I want to be, healthy when I'm older. I want to be able to walk. I had a client who her mom wasn't able to walk anymore. She's seeing, in front of her eyes how that quality of life, was diminishing. And she was like, I don't want that for myself. And I think that's such a powerful lens to come out your journey from, and is definitely a big driver I see, especially with, the, moms I'm working with. And so, what else, like when, you're older, I think we don't think about this that much, but, walking, being able to be mobile and strong, but like, what else do you think about when it comes to just having a higher quality of life in those later years?
So it does all come down to strength. Functional strength provides the greatest impact on people's lives. We end up being limited in the choices that we make if we're not strong enough to do those things. So there's the very clear examples that everybody usually picks on to say, hey, if you're in your 60s or 70s or whatever, and you want to play with a child on the floor, can you get on the floor and then get back up? Okay, mm-hmm. So that's kind of an easy one. We could do it even simpler and just simply say, do you have enough strength and mobility to sit down and stand up without significant assistance? Because not every chair you choose to sit on is going to have arms or, all the same height or whatever, so we need to obviously be able to live in the world, and sitting is a part of living in the world. Your client's mother who cannot walk is probably not limited because of cardiovascular. She's probably limited because of orthopedic issues. And those orthopedic issues might have been mitigated had she spent the last period of time being as functionally strong as possible. So obviously, I don't know that individual specifically, but we can make a good guess that if we are strong, healthy adults in our 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, that we are going to be fairly strong in our 70s, 80s.
Yep. And a really easy quote that I love to remind people is, if you don't use it, you lose it. I see a lot of people come to me, especially like, an overhead reach, they can't get, fully up straight. And I'm like, do you ever like go in that position? And they're like, I don't actually think so. And yeah. So like, just, doing things is important.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea that we as in human beings lose muscle in a very slow curve has actually been disproven. Moves to a slow curve when we aggregate across thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. But actually, when you look at individuals, what happens is that they have a certain amount of muscle mass, they have a certain amount of functional strength, and then an event happens that causes them to change their life. All right. So it could be an injury, it could be a divorce, it could be something that changes their life that essentially means they've changed their pattern, they've changed their choices, their circumstances have changed, whatever it ends up being. And that might cause a cliff of some sort where their strength and fitness goes here. And then they never really regain it, or they regain it slowly, because that's just unfortunately how things work when you build back up. And then as they get older, so maybe that builds back up, but then there's another cliff. And so what happens is that we have these giant cliffs in our lives, And if we can, of course, avoid those cliffs, meaning we have such a high bar here that the cliff might only be here, and so on and so forth. So everybody just needs to essentially strive for the highest bar they possibly can set, because we know we're going to have some of these cliffs, but we hope they're not drastic.
Yeah. Set yourself up for success. And I saw a post on Instagram the other day. It was showing different examples of like longevity, where it was saying like that heart attack started when you were 20, and was kind of like showing those unhealthy eating habits from, when they were way younger. And then there was another one, it was like, your that dementia like started when you were, 30, and things like that. And I just thought that was such a powerful way to, show that what we do now matters so much, and what you're saying, like setting ourselves up for success in the long run. And I think
Yeah.
the brain health side of things is so interesting to me. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Louisa Nicole. Have you heard of her?
No.
You should check her out. Everyone should check her out on Instagram. But she is a neuroscientist who really focuses on studying the brain. And the biggest thing she's talking about all the time is exercise and the effects that exercise will have on your brain. And she's always talking about, longevity and just the impacts of, training. And I think that's so freaking cool that literally exercise is the number one answer.
The number one thing. So Dr. Atia, who's obviously very famous, in his podcast and his book, talks about how exercise is as important as every negative vice that you can come up with combined. So if you eat poorly, smoke, have a sedentary life, all of those things, that all obviously impacts your health and longevity. But he goes, but if your exercise is dialed in right, you can counteract all of that stuff. Now, clearly he's not giving a, carte blanche to do everything, that you want over here. What he's simply saying is that this is that powerful on how the body essentially adapts to this stress.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's really cool. I had someone recommend his book to me the other week. It's called Longevity.
It's called Outlive.
Oh.
And it's fantastic to listen to his story and to hear about how he looks at all these studies and then makes conclusions and things like that. It's great. It's really good.
Everyone add that to your reading list. It's on mine.
Yeah. Or his podcast. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I didn't know he had one.
Yeah. So it's called The Drive, Peter Attia podcast. And you can get like a lot of like little 20-minute excerpts and things like that just on YouTube, which are really worth it.
Awesome. Do you have any other like favorite resources? I mean, other than this podcast and us and, your work and my work, but any other people that you like to learn from?
So, I mean, just name dropping here, Peter Attia is great. Dr. Stacy Sims is also really good. She really focuses on women's health. So I like a lot of what she says. Not, just like everything, not everything is like, well, I don't know if I really agree with 100% there, but that's okay. Let's see. Dr. Danielle Lyon is pretty good, especially in terms of protein consumption. She tends to, I think, overdo a little bit of what's realistic, but her major points are, it is so difficult to overeat on protein that, let's say you overshoot, your protein needs. She's like, it just doesn't get broken down to glucose the same way that carbohydrates and fats do. And so sure, it can be, but because that molecule, that macronutrient rather, just is so used for tissue rebuild, it's very difficult to overeat on that. So the message is people should eat more protein.
Yeah. Yeah. I realize like these different people that we see on social media, like they have like that one core message. And I think that's really cool. And that's something that I feel like you do really well, and something that I'm trying to get, I guess, like more clarity on which direction I want to go with, like, what's my core one message that I want to dial in on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough because you want to be able to, help people in lots of different ways. And so, we're kind of moving more into sort of like what we say is only going to fall onto so many ears. So therefore, we tend to end up having, if we really want it to sink in, we tend to have to limit what we say. What I say is that a little can go a long way. The minimalist approach can really have a big impact. Now, clearly that means, we're talking about kind of lots of things, but it's all about health or health span and doing just the minimum effective dosage. It's not to say that if you really like to go do X, Y, and Z because it's your hobby and it's what you do for de-stressing and whatever, that you can do all those things. It just might not be absolutely necessary for improving your goal. It's more than likely helping your goal. In some cases, it could be hurting your goal, but yeah, it's difficult to kind of manage your messaging. So I understand, because you do want to talk about lots of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, because I feel like a lot of us are passionate about so much. And I actually did recently get a lot of clarity on my messaging. So I'm like blanking on that. But so I did an activity with my business coach, and my brand vision, I'm just sharing this just for everyone,
Yep. Yeah.
is transforming women into their strongest and healthiest selves. And my brand belief is that a happier world starts with healthier women. And, we believe that women are meant to be strong. So I would say that that is really my core message, is that, more women need to get under a barbell and start learning that lifting weights isn't this scary thing that, isn't for you, and that it will have so much impact in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and Dr. Stacy Sims, who I mentioned, is a big believer in that. And, heavy weights, means, across all humans, it means that your body can't do it for greater than 20 seconds, sort of like it means you have to exhaust that creatine phosphate system, that energy system, those first one or two energy systems, because the moment we get into, like, the moment we get glycolytic, we start having to do a lot of other things. So when the strength set lasts pushing into 25, 30 seconds, and certainly 45 seconds and beyond, we start having to, certainly we're going to start getting, all those hydrogen ions and things like that, but we start to lose some of the real strength benefits. So to your point, heavy means you've got to reach a difficult and challenging rep set inside of 20 seconds. And for most people, that's hard to do. I mean, and the only real way to do that is to usually pick up a heavier load. Now, you can do it with other things, with lots of isometric tension and that sort of stuff, but that all takes skill and practice. But an easier way to say is, hey, if you're doing a shoulder press with 10-pound weights, I bet you can do 30 of them. And that takes a lot longer than 20 seconds. That takes a minute, So 15 pounds. Well, if you do 30 with a 10, you could probably do 15 or 20 with a 15. Still, we're longer than 20 seconds. So now we're on to a 20 pound. All right, well, that's a significant jump, each of these 5-pound jumps. So maybe that puts you in that range of, 7, 8. And even that might be a little bit. So that's where you sort of mix up, we're talking their rep ranges. Rep ranges are basically just a way for us to count time. Sometimes we might do 25 pounds and we're only doing like sets of 2s because we're really trying to build, high end strength. And then sometimes we're going to grab that 20 pound, we're going to do sets of 6, always stopping before failure, and our skill stays high. And then, oscillating between those two. And then every now and again, we do something like glycolytic, like once a month, we'll pick up that 15 and we'll do shoulder presses for 15 or 20 reps, just to show some more capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. And, unfortunately, we see this a lot, that people are, I guess, under training was how I would just best describe it, is that, we're doing weights that you could keep doing for, like you're saying, like forever. And it's like,
Yeah.
if we're not challenging our bodies in a way that's like sending a signal, hey, we need to get better.
Yeah.
And we can already just do it with ease, it's not going to do much. And unfortunately, that's like a lot of the messaging, especially towards women. It got, I think, so much better for a long time, but I feel like recently, like the whole, oh, train, with lighter weights and it's going to help you tone is like this messaging that's coming back around and that I'm seeing a lot more, which, I think that sure you can use a lighter weight, but you still have to be pushing like to that sort of close to failure area. And so yeah, definitely want to make sure that you're training hard, even if it's once a week, twice a week, do your, low intensity exercise outside of that, but just know that it's not going to necessarily get you those results that hard lifting would.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's Stacy Sims talks a lot about the perceived high intensity training. What she essentially is saying is that so your body only understands load or tension. Your body only understands tension and time. And so that's really all that your muscles kind of get. So how much tension do you need to bring to complete the given task, and how long does that task take? What she essentially says physiologically is that if you can do a high intensity bout of high intensity interval training for 45 minutes, it's really not high intensity, it's moderate intensity. The true definition of high intensity is that you are done, and that you couldn't do this 3 times a week, 4 times a week. And if we look at athletes that have real high intensity demands, so track is an easy one for us to get. Okay, so if we take a 200-meter sprinter, okay, halfway around the track, they're going to train all out effort only a few times in their training cycle. They know that they can't train at that high intensity and come back for more. So they have to train at an appropriate intensity. So they train at 75 and 80%. And there's some periodization and different things like that. However, their 75 and 80% are based off of their true high intensities. So we as regular people might never need to test, quote unquote, test our run rep maxes or that sort of stuff, but we still need to kind of understand where that number is so that we can live in the training zone of 75 or 80% so that we continue to make progress. Because to your point, many of us just take a guess and we're down here at like 50 or 60%. And yeah, we can do that. And it feels hard and we get tired, but then we do it again on Wednesday and then we do it again. Or, if we do it, I come to the gym every morning at 6 a.m. and, that sort of stuff. Well, then are you training at the proper intensity?
Yeah. Yeah. And we see that a lot. But I'm curious, did you listen to Stacy Sims on Dr. Huberman?
So I didn't do the full 3-hour podcast, but yeah, little bits. And she picks on some certain studios and programs and things like that. But it's similar to, she talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was a really good listen for anyone, especially women. I think she talked a lot about, it was primarily focused on like menopause. And yeah, the number one thing in terms of exercise, it's just like you were saying, is to avoid that like moderate intensity side of things. I think of it as like mixing weights with, kind of turning it into cardio, but it's not really cardio, but then it's not really weight training.
Exactly.
You're just kind of getting tired. And she says, having the super high intensity, actual high intensity side of things, just like you're talking about, and then the lower intensity sort of, or I guess, would you not lower intensity, but less stressful?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it depends on what you're trying to do. Like, so the lower intensity stuff that I might program or whatever would be with the intent of saying, I am doing cardiovascular training, right? So I am improving the stroke volume of my heart, the ability for my heart to pump blood hard. That is in zone 2 and 3 primarily. As I get closer to zone 4, and certainly by the time I get to zone 5, I'm training VO2, my ability to suck wind, but my heart is just fluttering. It's not really getting stronger because I have to be in these lower zones in order for me to train my cardiovascular output. If I'm going to do lower intensity movement, then what I'm training is mobility and range of motion and how good my body feels in space. So there's a neural patterning aspect to it. So all of those things that don't cost my body a lot but still give me a training benefit are great. So meaning I can do those daily or whatever, and it's because I don't really have to recover from them. So that's kind of, I think, where that low intensity category lives. The moderate intensity, I don't know, I guess some people would call kind of zone 3 cardiovascular training moderate. Certainly there's maybe some benefit to volume hypertrophy work in moderate intensity. It's not for every goal. And if we're going to start cutting things because we're interested in being minimalist, that might get cut. And then the quote unquote high intensity, which just means near high maximal effort. That's all I mean. So we're talking about high intensity on perceived exertion. That's obviously where we're going to get kind of the biggest strength benefits and VO2.
Yeah. So I'm curious if, like, I feel like a lot of people who, are into fitness, we start off with maybe training more often, harder, we're, in the gym 5 days a week. Do you think that a little bit of that, like, training harder, especially at the beginning of your journey, is very valuable and sort of setting you up for success? Or do you think that you could sort of take this minimalist approach like throughout your whole journey and sort of get, a similar return?
Yeah, so I think you could take this approach no matter where you are. It depends on where you're coming in, and age matters. When you're in your 20s, you can do anything and you're going to recover. All right. It's why we send 20-year-olds to war. All right. Because you can do anything and they're going to recover. All right. Or why college students can, go on benders and then still come back and recover on some level. Right. Because the body is just that resilient when it's that young. So you could do 5 days a week and still feel like you're doing fine and that sort of stuff. It's not a necessary baseline to build. Again, if you were saying it is my goal to be as strong as I possibly can and to build some muscle and to just be as healthy as possible, and you wanted to go ahead right away and adapt a 1 or 2 time a week training program, and you're only 25, you're going to see result. By the same token, if you're coming to this journey and you're 40 or 50 and you really haven't spent the last 10 years, doing a lot of things for your health and fitness, then that's definitely where you're going to start. Not like I need to ramp up and go right away to 5 days because I want to, kick it off. The body just doesn't do that because, as we said, it's all about what you can recover from. So 1 or 2 days a week is kind of a great place to start, understanding that you're going to have to lay some foundations in mobility and tendon strength and resiliency and all that sort of stuff as we build up.
Yeah, cool. It's so cool. Like, I mean, just while we're talking, I'm reflecting on my own journey and how I was the, gym rat in the gym 4 or 5 days a week. And then I was starting to just put all this pressure on myself in terms of my fitness, but also in terms of life and just stressing myself out. And that just kind of led to this whole issue with my internal health and sort of like, all right, a little bit of a, what do you say? People call it like a dark night of the soul, figuring things out. And so that was me
Yep.
years ago. And
Yep.
Since then, I've really taken the minimalist approach, and it's blown my mind, like how I've been able to maintain my strength, maintain my muscle with, like sometimes I'm lifting, once a week or like not even. And then, just sort of going about things this way. And I think it's really, really cool.
There's a study talking about how that works. There was a study that took individuals and put them on a 12-week strength training program. So they pre-tested them where their strength was, 12 weeks, post-test, they all gained strength. Okay. That's not the magic sauce there. All right. But then what they did was they said for the remainder of the 9 months, all you're allowed to do is live your life. Okay. So there can be no strength training, right, for 9 months. Then they tested them again at their 1 year anniversary of starting their strength training program. Okay. And what they found was that the average person lost only 50% of their gains. Okay. So if you started off and you could lift 100 pounds in a given lift, and then you went up to 150 at the end of your 12 weeks, losing just 50% of your gain means that in 1 year, you were able to lift 125. So you're still stronger than what you actually started with. And it just gives proof to the fact that your muscles do not have a cliff when it comes to strength. Again, another example of old man strength. Like it's just built. Conditioning is a different story. There's a cliff with that. But to your point, you miss a week, you miss a week and a half, 2 weeks, whatever, and there's no real strength training, then you're okay. Now, I would say there needs to be a little something, like you're on a 10-day vacation. Well, there are some body weight calisthenic things that you can do that have high tension. Practicing isometric squeezes, can really still maintain a significant amount of neural strength, so you don't lose a step when you come back in. But to your point, if it's once a week or a little less often, then all is not lost.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really fun just seeing how you can maintain what you've built, a little bit easier than it was to build it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so is there anything else really that you want to share with our listeners? I actually kind of had one more question for you.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, other than what do you see is the biggest block within people when it comes to, their health and fitness and being successful in their goals? Like, do you see something from a mindset perspective, or what is that thing?
Yeah. I think it's frustration. I think there's so many mixed messages in our industry, in this multi-billion-dollar industry, where everybody's trying to carve out a little space where they can pass on a message. I think it's good that more doctors are getting involved and exercise physiologists. In the last 10 years, I think more of those messages are becoming popular and feeding into the regular people's lives, where they might actually start picking some of those things up. But I think people get frustrated when they try to do this exercise program, or they try to go to the gym on their own, they try to do this nutrition plan, and it just doesn't work. And so they're left with, I tried, and screw it, I'm just going to do what I want to do anyway. And then they just sort of then maybe, some time goes by, they feel bad about themselves, they feel like a failure, and then they try again. Maybe they try a different thing and that doesn't work, and so on and so. But it really comes down to almost anything can work, especially at the beginning. And then you just adjust and modify if you stay consistent. So there are people in the world that do not eat a lot of protein that live long and healthy lives. So if I tell you, hey, I think you should eat more protein, and you're just like, no, yeah, okay, you can still be a really healthy individual. That health might start to shift. If you tell me that you want to be a figure competitor and want to go on stage at 14% body fat, but you're not going to eat a lot of protein, it's probably close to impossible. So goals matter, but if we're just talking about health, then there's lots of ways to achieve that.
Yeah. And I agree. It's like that frustration leads to, when people have tried things over and over and over, and maybe it doesn't work, they start to believe, oh, maybe this just isn't for me. Maybe there's something wrong with me. I can't do this. And then that leads to, taking no action. And, that's definitely the place that we want to avoid.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, for coming on. This was awesome. Is there anything else you A, want to leave our listeners with, and then B, where can they find you?
So I appreciate your invite here. I hope that, we've kind of maybe steered some people in the right direction. Bottom line, sort of strength train and really strength train. Like, ask yourself the question. I think that 20 seconds is really a good barometer for, can I do the given task that I'm doing for longer than 20 seconds with good quality form and all that good stuff. And if the answer is I can go much longer, then you've got to figure out a way to make it harder. Where they can find me. So we're building this longevity lab here in Ashburn, Virginia. PepLongevityLab.com is the website. That's obviously going to get sort of revamped as we continue to grow. My website is workforcecoaching.com. And I think that's pretty much it.
Amazing. Thanks again, Brian. Hope that you and everyone listening has a great rest of their day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.